Hi everyone, it's Kim from the Shamrock Quilt Studio, and today we're talking about Barnstar again. But this time we're talking about starting the borders on the quilt. These are the inner borders that are going to connect the really large diamond star. Have you ever seen a quilt block this big? Whoops! To the borders. And I've sewn together these in sections, and I'm happy to show them to you right after this. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. And we're talking about these borders today. And remember, we're going to take and create a border that bridges between the large diamond star block and then our 16-inch blocks that we created to go all around that quilt design. So what I did when I was first starting to talk about this project is kind of create a design where I've got the 24-inch block in the middle and then the 16 by 16 blocks around the outside. And we're still using that same design. We've made a couple little tweaks. The first one was we put in a sashing between those 16-inch blocks. And we have this sashing at 1.5 inches finished, which means we started with a 2-inch strip of fabric that we added to these. They were cut at 17 inches. The squares should be 16.5 by 16.5, and that should mean that we have a little 1/4 inch hanging out on each side of these pieces. And for the most part, we pretty much do. So when we start and we get to the point where we're going to sew them together, we'll go in there and trim off those little 1/4 inch extra pieces. But what do I have today? Let me show you. First of all, the top strip and the bottom strip are exactly alike. They are, and I'm sorry we don't have a bigger area to show you this because they're going to get kind of big. But I decided that this was going to be the block that we used in the corners. And then the other three would, the other three would follow, and then in each corner we'd have this. So we have that block here. We're going to call this 1 in each of the corners. And then we have 2, 3, and 4 that follow. But the first strip is going to be across the top. So it's going to have a 1 block, this one, here and here. So there's 5 blocks here. And that's the same for the top and the bottom. The only difference is when we get to the other side, we're going to flip it so that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 here and 1, 2, 3, 4 at the bottom. Then on the sides, we only have 3 blocks. That one I think will be a little easier for you to see because these get pretty long. 16 times 5. See, it's really getting up there, isn't it, size-wise? Okay, so here's the one on the sides. And on this one we've got 1, 2, 3 blocks with the sashing in between each one and then sashing on one end. And I went ahead and put sashing on the end of every block just to keep it consistent. But as we begin to sew them together, you will notice that on the blocks for the longer piece, one of those sashings comes down. So it doesn't go straight across. I flip the block so that the sashing is towards the body of the quilt. And I didn't sew quite to the edge, so we can connect that when we're ready. So our task today is to try to figure out how big the inside borders are going to need to be. And what we're going to do is we're going to start measuring. And I'm going to need this piece of paper and a pencil to take some notes. Now my problem is never that I don't have a pencil. My problem is always that I don't have a pencil with a point on it. But we're going to try here. Okay, so for these center pieces, and if you happen to see this, this is not the sketch we're using. We're just using that as a scrap piece of paper. So we've got 3 16-inch blocks, but they're really 16 point. No, they should be 16 because we finished these, and they are plus the 1.5. So we've got 16.5, 1.5, 16.5, 1.5, and 16.5. So and see, I've already messed that up. That's not correct because these sides are finished. You'll have to pardon, I'm kind of thinking about how we're doing this as we're going. So our finished sizes, we need to go with finished sizes on this. So there's 16, and there's 3 blocks, so 16 times 3, and then we've got 1.5 times 2 in the middle. So that's 48 plus 3, 51 inches from the end of this block to the end of this block, not counting this sashing. But we do need to count that sashing and the other sashing. So 51 and then 1.5 and 1.5, 3. 54 inches is going to be the total length between the top two. So this section here is going to be 54.5. This is why the math was driving me crazy before. Whew. And as long as we get it reasonably close, we'll make at least one of those strips a little oversized so we can adjust. Okay, and this one is 24.5. So it's going to finish at 24. So there's 30 inches difference between those. That means that each sashing is going to have to be a finished width of 15 inches. So I think the easiest thing to do is have a 5-inch white border, a 5-inch color border, and a 5-inch white. That would give us 15 inches. Now we have to make sure we add seam allowances on there. So they're going to be 5.5, 5.5, and 5.5. So what I'm going to do next, and I think we're just going to have a quick show today just to. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to cut the 5.5-inch white border that's going to go directly around this. We're going to square this up and add that border. Now, I'm not doing mitered corners on this. I'm going to sew it so that if we're looking at this, the border here is going to be just on the sides, and then the top and the bottom, the border will go all the way over across the side borders. So I need some 5.5-inch strips. And if need be, remember we talked about we might have, we might add a little bit of fabric just to make sure. We're going to do that on that outside border. And if we look at this, it is going to be not wide enough. No, it will be wide enough. No, it won't be wide enough. It is not going to be wide enough to get across it. So we may want to talk about cutting a lengthwise piece of fabric. And if we do that, that middle square is 24 plus 5 plus 5, 34 inches. So if we do a 36, a 1 yard of this, because remember we will have, that won't work because we're going to have borders on the outside that are even longer, right? So we're really like 45 inches. Let's see how much fabric we have on this original fabric. It does get a bit complicated, doesn't it? Okay. So there's a yard. And there's almost 2 yards. So let's think about how long that longest strip is. It's 16 inches finished by 5. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sashings and 1.5. So that's 6 inches. And that's 80 inches. That's the outside. But the inside, I'm thinking this all completely wrong. Because the inside pieces, no, I am thinking it right. It's the inside calculation we need. So the 3 times 16, so the 51 inches is correct. So if we go back to maybe 54 inches long, we should have enough. And I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to rearrange. So give me just a second. Okay, I am still running, so let me start talking again. Okay, I've moved my machine a little bit, so I have some more room. And what we're going to do is I mark 24 inches here. And then I'm going to mark another 24 inches. And I'm using my little disappearing marker, and I'm not being super fastidious on getting that measurement just right. Okay, so that's going to be 48 inches here. And then this is 58. And 58 should be well more than we need. So I think we're gonna go with 58. Now the great thing is we've got more fabric, but I think I'm feeling pretty confident about that number. But mistakes do happen, you know that, right? And it's not brain surgery. So that's going to be 58 right there. I'm actually cutting at 59 because while I think this is straight, I'm not 100% sure it's straight. And we're just going to use the fold line as our perpendicular edge. And that looks good. And I'm going to come here and do it from this side. I always find my cuts are better if I can cut on the right side of the board. Oh, beautiful, clean cut. Excellent. I love that. I love that. Okay, now we have really used a lot of this fabric. It looks like we've got maybe one go round with the bolt left. And what we're going to do instead of cutting with the fabric is we're going to go length of fabric. So we're going to cut off one of these selvage edges. We're going to refold the fabric. And I'm going to fold it in half and cut it because it's just too long to cut single thickness. Okay. So I'm lining these up. And I'm going to put a couple of pins in here. They may be too close. And the first thing we're going to do, even that's too long. Oh my. I don't like that's too long. I don't want this to move on me, so I'm going to put that there. It's very heavy. And we're going to cut off probably about a ½ inch. And that is including the little frilly fringe part of the selvage. Nice clean cut. I don't know if that's a new blade or what, but it sure acts like it. And then we're going to match this line that we just cut up here in the overlap. Okay, beautiful. Beautiful little piece we cut off there. Okay, we said 5 inches finished, and we're going to give ourselves a ½ inch seam allowance. And I'm going to have to remove that pin, relocate it, this one as well. That just kind of keeps them in place. 5½ inches. You ever do something and you've been calculating it so long and you're just kind of hesitant to make that cut? That's a bit the way I feel right now. But here goes. Now, did you see what I did? I kept my cutter still. I moved my ruler making sure that it stayed up next to that blade. Make sure it's straight, and then we cut it. Okay, there we go. And we probably need to make one more. I hope that these are going to be long enough for the top borders as well, but we'll find out. I would really prefer it if we didn't have to move the fabric each time, because that just throws everything off a bit. It gets a little funky curve in it. Okay, so 2 strips cut at 5.5, and we're going to roll with that right now. So I think I need to set a date for cleaning up the studio. It's a little messy. Let me spin my machine around, and we will pin that. I love this machine, but it is a little bit on the heavy side. It certainly wouldn't be one that I would want to travel with. Okay, so we have our big block here. Now this block, we've had it made for a month or so. And I want to make sure that the corners are square. So let me grab my really big square. I like to use the biggest square I have when I'm squaring blocks, because a little square can set you up for cuts that aren't really appropriate. And I like to look at how other areas of this line up. And you'll notice we don't really have too much there to trim. A little bit here, a little bit there. Here we're a little short. I think we can kind of maybe adjust that just a little bit. And we're going to just spin that around and do the same. Again, we're checking here and checking here. This is really good. And I may have already done this, I'm not sure. You just want to be careful that you don't keep cutting, even if you're cutting just a little bit, that you don't keep cutting and cutting and cutting. We've done 2 corners. You could end up going around this thing a couple of times and end up cutting off way more than you should. And the other trick that I'll tell you is when I have it in place, I'll usually inch it out about a 1/16 of an inch just to make sure I don't cut off too much. Now was that 2 or was that 3? I think that was 3 we just did. And this should be the last corner. That one's a little more crooked than the rest. We're just gonna cut off this little high point right here and be done with it. I do want to clarify something that I've been talking about, and I just want to make sure that no one misunderstands what I mean. There are sometimes when I talk about easing things in or stretching a block, and I want to tell you what I mean by that. When you're pressing, sometimes you don't get that seam pressed completely open or completely to the side, and it's not a nice, really flat seam. And when you do that, that makes your block a little bit smaller than it really should be. So we want to make sure that we do that. Now, if you look at just this right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seams. So even if they're just one thread length different between each seam with what my seam is versus what it would be if it was completely flat, it could be quite a bit. So we want to just make sure that we have done everything we can, and it's what size it really should be. This should be 24.5, and it's 24 and almost a half. So if we give it just a little tug, just pulling it straight, pulling it tight, giving it just a little bit of pressure, like you would nudge a child to go do something. You don't push them down, you just kind of get them started in that direction. That's what I'm talking about. And we're actually going to do that just a little bit more on here. That way you just keep everything lined up and moving together. I think sometimes people hear that and they think, oh, well, you don't want to stretch it out of place. No, I don't want you to stretch it out of place. But I do want those seams to be completely flat. And when they're completely flat, you are more likely to get the sizes, the shapes that you need. Now, I'm going to pin most of these seams just so that we can sew quickly through this. When they're thick like some of these are, your machine is going to struggle to get over them. And I think that pinning helps. So we have 9 seams that we need to pin down, plus the edges. Now, I did not check to make sure that we are centered up because I didn't cut the strip of fabric we're using for a border. What I did was I started that strip on this side over here and left about 1/4 inch longer than the square. And I'm going to try to use, especially for this set of borders, full strips. I'll take that one out. And then I'm going to cut this, not at 1/4 inch, but at, what would that be, 3/8. And then I'll put that pin back in. Okay, so that's pinned. We're going to go to the opposite side and do that one now. And let's see, do we have enough? We do have enough. So we'll put this down. All 4 sides of this are cut, so there's not one that you should use and one you shouldn't use. Sometimes we're cutting with a border and we're leaving that selvage on because it's easier. We just don't want to sew it in. But in this case, all of them are cut. And let's just double check real quick. Same thing. So we're going to need to just... So you can actually even tell when I do that how this pulls up. And it pulls up because it's not pressed. And I'm going to call it open. It's not really open, but it's not pressed down so that you're keeping that fabric on the right side open. I hope you can see what I'm doing here. It's kind of hard to know if that overhead camera is pointing in the right direction or not. But we're just pinning each seam in place so that we don't have to worry about flipping the seam over. Okay, so we've got 2 borders on. We just need to stitch them down. Same thing with this one. I have to take that pin out. So we had this much left over. If we cut it 58 inches, 48, so it should be about 10. It's a little shorter than 10. We're not going to sweat that right now. We're just going to keep moving. I don't know where my pin cushion went. And we're going to stitch these on real quick. And I think that I'm going to not talk so we can speed this up and you can see what it looks like. Okay, my battery went out at the very end of the stitching, but I think you know exactly what we were doing. We've done it before. We'll do it many more times again. And we're going to just take our pins out now and see what we've got. There's one side. Okay, we've got a border on each side of our diamond star, and I've just checked, and there's one side and 2 sides. We've been really good. We've been able to keep our points. I think once we press that, that's close enough. Yeah, we've been able to keep our points. So what we're going to do next is we're going to press this open really well. And then I will need one more strip because I'm going to need 1 strip here and 1 strip here to finish up the border around that. Now look how big that's getting. Whoa. So we're going to go from a 24-inch square to a, I think, almost 36 34-inch square like really quickly. I do want to press these before I put the others, so I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera and get all the borders on. Now when I put this second row on, I'm going to trim this up so that it matches, and then the border is going to go all the way from this side to the corner of this side. So the top borders are going to encompass the top of the side borders. That's what happens when you don't miter. And we're gonna it's easier just to go all the way across versus starting in the corner and then starting in the corner and starting in the corner. You could do it that way if you want to, but you're going to end up having at least one seam where you have to cut it back and sew it on at the end, kind of like a Y seam. And I don't particularly enjoy that, and I don't think it's necessary for this. That's where we're going to end this today. We have cut our strips. We've done some rudimentary calculations on how big our borders are going to be. So next time we come on, the other two are going to be on here. They're going to be pressed out, and then we're going to start working on that color border that's going to go on next. And at that point, we're going to move pretty quickly, because once we get the color border on, the next border is just going to be another white border like this. That'll go really quickly, and we'll also be looking at that point about putting the border of the 16-inch blocks on as well. And will be essentially the same thing. The only thing we'll have to worry about is we'll have to make that other white border just a little bit wider in case we need just a little bit more to match up. And we will do some dry fits as we get to that point. But we're getting really close to getting this together. Anyway, this is moving on really quickly now, and I think we're gonna see it come together within a week or two probably. In the meantime, I've put Miss Kelly back up on the board. This is an applique project that we did from start to finish on the channel. If you love applique, if you love the colors of this like I do, be sure to check that out. Just check out the playlist on our channel, and you can see this from start to finish, how it went. I thank you so much for joining me today. Please give us a thumbs up if you like the video, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. We're getting to the end now, and you don't want to miss it. We've put a lot of work into all of these little pieces to make bigger pieces, to make bigger pieces, to make a huge grand quilt. So join us and stay with us as we finish that up. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.